Hey everyone, welcome back. It's another edition of the Pick Six. I'm your host, Wobby, inside the Fieldhouse at TCO Performance Center in Eagan. I have your questions right here, so let's get to work. Question number one comes from Adam in San Francisco. What do we make of all the news about the offensive coaching staff? Is it Stefanski's offense or Gary Kubiak's? Well, Kevin Stefanski promoted to offensive coordinator, Gary Kubiak hired as the assistant head coach and offensive advisor. I think it's going to be Stefanski's offense. His ideas will reign supreme in the offensive meeting room, but Gary Kubiak's going to be a very valuable resource, not just for Kevin, but for head coach Mike Zimmer and the rest of the team as well. Gary Kubiak, a well-respected coach in this league. He's been a head coach, so he'll have that role of a sounding board for both Stefanski and Zimmer. Our next question comes from Ross, Richmond, British Columbia. Do you think the presence of a legitimate third receiver can take some pressure off the run game, as well as give Thielen and Diggs better matchups? I'm not so sure about the run game, but I do think a legitimate and consistent third receiver will help Diggs and Thielen get better matchups. I think it'll help the offense in general. Now, the Vikings had that role last year. It was Treadwell, it was Aldrick Robinson. For a game or two, it was Chad Beebe. So I think this offseason, the focus will be solidifying that third receiver spot. See if one guy can step up and hold it for the whole season. The third question comes from Kyle in Texas. What would keep the Vikings from going all in on offensive linemen this draft, or maybe by some other means, like trading for a player? Well, Kyle, offensive line will certainly be an emphasis for the Vikings this offseason in both the draft and free agency, but it's not the only area of the team the Vikings will pay attention to. Remember, you have to build a roster that can compete not just in 2019, but in seasons down the road. So while the offensive line is an area that needs attention, there are other positions that need attention as well, and the Vikings will use both the draft and free agency to address those spots. The next question comes from Joel in Woodbury, Minnesota. Is it the offensive line personnel, or is it an offensive line scheme problem? Well, as with most things, it's a marriage of the two. They both have to work well together. That's where Kevin Stefanski and Gary Kubiak are going to earn their money. Those two have to work with the rest of the offensive staff to figure out who you have on the roster and what are their strengths and what can they execute. That goes into what your scheme is. You can't ask players to execute things they aren't able to execute. Stefanski and Kubiak will work closely together to figure that out. Next question comes from Jeff in Sacramento, California. How do you feel about the current state of the old adage defense wins championships, looking at the final four teams in the playoffs right now? Well, the point Jeff is making is that the final four teams in the playoffs, Kansas City, the Rams, the Saints, and New England, well, they're the top four scoring teams in the NFL in 2018. But if you look at last year's Final Four, they all ranked in the top 5 in total defense: Minnesota, Jacksonville, Philadelphia, and New England. So I think both methods can get you to the promised land. Here's the bigger key. You have to play complementary football, and you have to get hot at the end of the season. That's what the Final Four teams in 2018 have done. And the final question comes from Chris in Utah. What was your favorite moment in the 2018 season? Lots to choose from here. Linval's touchdown in Philadelphia was good. Beating Green Bay at home in the second half of the season in primetime, that was fun. But I think my favorite moment was the fourth quarter of our Week 2 game at Lambeau Field. Kirk Cousins and the Vikings offense, they were on fire in the final 15 minutes. They scored 22 points. This awesome touchdown catch by Adam Thielen in the front corner of the end zone was super cool. Stephon Diggs had a good fourth quarter as well. I think that was my favorite moment because it showed what this Vikings offense can do when it's clicking on all cylinders. If our offense can play even close to that level with this defense, the Vikings will be a hard team to beat in 2019. That's it for this week's edition of the Pick Six. Thank you for your questions. Please continue to submit them to me at the email address at the bottom of the screen, and maybe we'll see you in next week's edition of the Pick Six. In the meantime, stay tuned to Vikings.com. Lots of news coming down the pike, and the Pro Bowl's coming up. The Vikings are going to have a handful of players in Orlando participating, and we'll have a crew there covering it for you. So stay tuned to Vikings.com for more of that.